Just past 3 a.m., somebody woke me up from a dang good sleep. Unsure who or what it was, I surveyed the bedroom for the culprit. I ruled out my wife, Nadine, who was asleep by my side. Neither was our 7-year-old daughter, Kara, rousing us as she sometimes did to complain about a tummy ache. I realized it was my cell phone. Everything else in the house was quiet. I picked up without checking the caller ID.
Hello? Do you remember the cigarette man?
The voice on the other end half whispered.
What? Who is this?
I replied, confused.
Do you remember his house? All brick and clapboard, and it looked normal on the outside. But on the inside, it was so strange.
The voice was louder. Now I recognized it. Mike Donnelly, Nadine, and I had been members of the same close-knit childhood friend group. Mike didn't live in the old neighborhood anymore like we did, but we stayed in touch. He sounded different. He was rambling, like he'd been drinking.
There was this television, and when we would watch it, it was always tuned to static and white noise.
He kept going, as if he hadn't heard me.
You remember him, right? I do. I remember the closet, and those awful games he liked to play.
I had no idea what he was ranting about, but it sounded messed up, and too confusing for me to decipher at 3 a.m.
Mike, you're drunk. Tell me about this tomorrow, man. I've got work in the morning.
But he continued. His voice was quavering now.
And the smell. It was so strong it would make you choke. I've been smelling it lately. It's like I'm back there. It's like the cigarette man is here.
I repeated that I would talk to him tomorrow and ended the call. I settled back into bed, Nadine still undisturbed beside me. I tried to forget about it until tomorrow, but before I finally dozed off, I couldn't stop thinking about Mike's ramblings. Who the hell was the cigarette man, and why did he sound so afraid? After work the next day, I brought Kara home from school while Nadine attended a PTA meeting. "Daddy, can I go play outside with Jackie?" Kara asked, referring to a second-grade classmate who was new to the neighborhood. I hadn't met her yet, but the two had been playing together lately. I gave her permission and she scurried out to meet her friend. I tried to avoid being a helicopter parent, so I was okay with her spending time near the house. Oakland Lane, a long, residential street, was safe and free of traffic. And besides, having Kara out of my hair gave me time to call Mike. I dialed Mike back from my recent calls. After a few long rings, somebody picked up the phone. It wasn't Mike, but his wife. She sighed exhaustedly before informing me that in the early hours of the morning, Mike had taken his own life. What happened after is a blur. Processing the sudden death of a lifelong friend was a shock. I only started coming to grips with it the day of Mike's funeral service, where our old group reunited, trading bittersweet memories about growing up on Oakland Lane. Disbelief permeated the gathering. No one could make sense of why he did it. My need to understand and my guilt led me back to the phone call. I could have brushed it aside as nonsense talk from a man who was in a very bad place, but I felt that I owed it to him to figure out what he had been saying. Sparing the details, I mentioned that Mike had been talking about the cigarette man recently, and asked if anyone knew who it was. Nobody replied. All our friends looked uneasy, some even agitated. An awkward silence filled the group, lingering until Nadine changed the subject. I had the familiar sense they were holding something back from me. You see, I'm 2 years younger than the rest of the crowd. I lived on the same street, and though I wasn't in the same grade, I was old enough to gain acceptance into the circle. However, our age difference always made them feel justified in treating me like a kid brother who was allowed to tag along but couldn't share in the secrets and gossip. Not wanting to cause conflict, I dropped the issue. When Nadine and I were back home, I raised it again. Why did everyone go radio silent when I mentioned the thing Mike talked about? I asked. You know, the cigarette man. Nadine turned her back. I don't know, she replied. He wasn't well. It probably didn't mean anything. Nadine knew more than she was letting on. I was almost sure of it. But like our friends at the funeral, she was still full of grief. It wouldn't be right for me to push her. To occupy myself, I walked towards the front yard where I knew Kara had been playing for a while. I heard her singing one of those jump rope rhymes. Watching her from just out of sight, I began to pay attention to what she was singing. The melody was identical to that old kid's song about the Muffin Man. The words, though, were different. Do you know the cigarette man? The cigarette man, the cigarette man. Do you know the cigarette man who lives on Oakland Lane? I almost interrupted Kara's play to question her about where she had learned about the cigarette man. I knew, though, she had likely overheard me asking her mother about it. Still, it troubled me. After we put Kara to sleep that night, Nadine retreated to her bedroom. I stayed downstairs on the couch, drinking a beer and watching the late-night shows. The host was telling one of his mindless jokes when the picture on the screen abruptly began to break up. The image became fuzzier until it had transitioned into static. The television show's audio became less intelligible until it was replaced with the crackle of white noise. The white noise escalated into a deafening roar. I put my hands over my ears reflexively, but nothing changed. I realized that the volume of the speakers themselves had not gotten any louder. Impossibly, it was as if the white noise had penetrated my head, blocking everything else out. Suddenly, the black and white dots flittering across the screen began to collect themselves once more. The picture that reformulated itself on the screen was not the one I had been watching before. It was distorted and unstable, like an old VCR tape. I saw a modest one-story home constructed of brick and clapboard siding, set back from the road by a grassy front yard. Sound still raged inside of my head. I heard the howl of wind whirling about me, as if I was standing outside on a turbulent night. On screen, a figure stood underneath the home's porch light. Tall and middle-aged, he sported a grizzled scruff across his face. He wore blue jeans and a crinkled flannel shirt, and in one hand he held out a lit cigarette. The other hand stretched out towards me, curling his fingers in a beckoning motion. Come. We locked eyes and I knew he saw me. The scene, the house, the man and his gaze stirred two emotions inside of me. One was something like a deja vu. The other was pure dread. I remained in a trance-like state until I heard Nadine's voice calling out from our bedroom upstairs. Baby, is that you? Are you in there? The sounds no longer filled my head. The picture on the television had receded once more into static. I did notice one thing though. The lingering smell of cigarette smoke. Nadine and I weren't smokers. Sensing something wrong, I dashed upstairs. The farther I ascended, the smoky aroma strengthened. Our bedroom was the nearest room in the upstairs hallway. Next was Kara's bedroom, and towards the end was an adjacent guest bathroom. I turned into our bedroom, Nadine huddled by the bed, holding our pajama-clad daughter. You've been downstairs, right? Nadine whispered. Yes, I said. What's going on? Kara came in here and told me someone was in the guest bathroom, Nadine explained. But it wasn't Daddy. my protective instincts kicking in. Advancing towards the guest bathroom, the smell of smoke was overpowering. I could see that the light was on, its glow spilling out eerily underneath the door. I could hear someone taking slow, raspy breaths inside. Ready for a confrontation, I grasped the knob and I flung the door open, and nothing. There was nobody inside, only a stench so strong it made me gag, and a trail of ash in the sink. It looked like someone had put a cigarette out against the ceramic. Whoever or whatever he was, the cigarette man was real, and he had been inside my home. I was aware Nadine knew more than she had let on, and I wanted answers. I decided I would get them tomorrow. When I returned to the bedroom, I told Nadine that there was no one there and assured Kara she had simply had a nightmare. I let her sleep with us for the night anyway. After breakfast, Kara asked me if she could go play outside with Jackie. I sent her off. With Kara gone, maybe Nadine would tell me what she knew. "You need to be honest with me," I said, entering the kitchen where she was doing dishes. I told her everything. About the images that had materialized on the television screen, the overwhelming scent of smoke, and how there was something in the guest bathroom last night. After a pause, she said, "I just wanted to let it stay in the past. The man you described, you couldn't have seen him. He's been dead for many years. When we were kids, there was a man who lived in the neighborhood, right on Oakland Lane. A loner, he lived by himself. His name was Jack Enfield, but we didn't know it then. He was a chain smoker, so we just called him the Cigarette Man. He terrorized children. He tormented our group for the entire summer." "What?" I replied. "I don't remember this." "Because we protected you. You were too young and we felt responsible for you. We were easy pickings, I guess. Little rascals always hanging around the neighborhood while the adults were at work. Whenever he found us, he would always take one. We always made sure that it wasn't you. I guess that's why you don't remember." "Take one where?" "To his house. The one you say you saw. That was it. He would make us play these twisted games. Games where he would hurt us. I think he liked our fear and our pain. He locked Mike in a closet once for hours. Mike was always claustrophobic, even before it happened. And you've seen the scars on my ankles." "What about them?" I asked. Nadine had a pair of circular scars about an inch apart on her right ankle. They had been there for as long as I could remember, and I'd never thought anything of them. "They're burns," Nadine said. "Cigarette burns." "You guys should have told someone," I said. "We were kids. We didn't know what to do. We just tried to protect you." After that summer, the cigarette man got sick. Cancer. Too sick to torture us anymore. He died and his house was sold. Bulldozed to build a new one. We all stopped talking about it. It was an unspoken agreement. Nadine trembled. Recalling the truth about the cigarette man had shaken her. She asked where Kara was. I didn't blame her for wanting to keep our daughter close right now. "She's outside with her friend," I said. "Who?" asked Nadine. "Jackie, her classmate. The new girl," I said. Nadine gasped. "I know every girl in her class. There's no Jackie in the 2nd grade." I rushed towards the bay windows at the front of her house, praying that my fears were wrong. Across the road, a tall man in a flannel shirt and jeans led Kara by the hand beyond a grassy yard, towards the familiar one-story home. Once I got outside, they were already in front of the cigarette man's house. The house sat across the street and a few houses down from mine. It was identical to the one that I had seen last night, down to the brick and clapboard exterior and the porch light out front. I knew that the house had not been there this morning, yet it didn't seem out of place at all. I couldn't even remember what it had replaced. It was like it had always been there, and at some point in the past, buried in my childhood memory, it had been. That was a past which I should have left behind, its pain erased by the passage of time. Instead, it had been dragged into the present, into Mike's life, into my home and into my family, places that it had no business being. I sprinted across the street, screaming Kara's name and anything else I could think of to stop them. The cigarette man opened his front door, his other hand still holding Kara's. He paused, turning around. His gray eyes looked upon me like I was an old friend. A stab of dread, the kind only he could bring, jolted through me. He shepherded Kara through the doorway, and he slammed it shut. I raced up the knoll in the front of the house. I stepped onto the porch, preparing to break the door down if it was locked. I twisted the knob and I leaned forward. It swung open effortlessly, and the momentum carried me into the house. It reeked of smoke. I heard the door swing back shut. I heard other things too. The sounds of voices echo throughout the small house. "Please, mister, I don't want to be here anymore. Please, let me out." I knew that voice. Mike Donnelly. Not as I had heard him recently, but as he sounded when we were kids. The next voice was a young girl's. For a second, I thought that it was Kara. They sound so similar. "I don't want to keep playing. I just want to go home. Just let me go home." That was Nadine. I can't tell you how many more there were. All that fear and pain had festered in this house long after it was demolished, lingering somewhere outside the boundaries of all things seen. The room's only source of illumination was provided by an old television set sitting on a wooden stand on the far end of the room. Static filled the screen. Standing in front of the television facing me were Kara and the cigarette man. Kara had her neck craned almost 180 degrees over her shoulder, entranced by whatever she saw on the static. "Kara!" I yelled, but she didn't even look towards me. I turned my attention to the cigarette man and commanded him to let her go. He grinned, exposing a set of yellow teeth, and he dropped her hand. I crossed the room and I grabbed Kara, yanking her away from the cigarette man, who offered no resistance. I was pulling her quickly towards the front of the house when I realized how dark it was inside. It wasn't just that there were no lights turned on. There were no outside light either. Peering through a window near the front door, all I saw was black. Not nighttime, just pitch black. It's hard to describe what nothing looks like to someone who hasn't seen it. Kara and I would not be leaving together. There was nowhere to leave to. I remembered what Nadine had told me. He always took one. All those years ago, my friends made sacrifices to protect me. I had been the youngest, the most vulnerable, but I was a man now and a father. It was my turn to do the protecting. It was my turn to play the cigarette man's terrible games. I turned back to the cigarette man, still motionless on the far end of the room. "I'll stay," I said. He nodded. Outside the window, I saw the front lawn and beyond it, Oakland Lane. I instructed Kara, confused but unharmed, to go home to Mommy and to lock the door. She laughed. He let me go the next day. When I returned home after I checked on my family, I locked myself in my office and I sobbed. Not for myself, but for poor Mike and my wife, and the other children whose tiny voices reverberated inside that house. Shortly after, Nadine, Kara, and I packed up and moved to a new home in the neighboring town. It's been a few months and we're okay. Kara doesn't seem to remember much about the whole thing. We don't let her out of our sight, but I believe we put the ghosts of the past behind us. The only thing that's changed is the urge I've had lately. Every so often, I find myself unable to sleep, stricken by a craving that is alien yet familiar. On those nights, I slip out of bed and I retrieve a pack I keep in an old shoebox. I tiptoe down the hallway and check in on Kara before letting myself out. I make sure not to turn the light on overhead as I stand on the front porch, puffing away, smoke rising like incense through the still night air.